Database you can use anything, guys. I'm going with H2 database. I'm adding H2 dependency. Then we need to work with Excel reports. For that we need to add Apache POI API. Apache POI API. And we are going to work with this PDF reports. For working with the PDF reports, I'm using one API called OpenPDF. Web starter, data JPS starter, H2 dependency, Apache POI API, and OpenPDF. You can create Lombok also. You can add the Lombok also for setters and getters. Project Lombok dependency we can add. Then next one,
Recording in progress.
where we can test our REST API. So in order to develop this third mini project, I am going to create one starter application using Spring Boot with the web starter. Web starter is used to develop the REST API. Data JPA starter, where I can communicate with the database. Then H2, it is for embedded database. Then Apache POI API for Excel report. OpenPDF for PDF generation. To generate the documentation for the REST API, Swagger UI, and to test my REST API. Chalo, next one. Configure application properties. Configure application properties in application.properties file. What are the properties we are going to configure? Data source properties. If you require server port if required. Data source properties, with which database you are going to communicate. Now I am communicating with the H2. You can communicate with the Oracle as well as you can communicate with the MySQL also. I'm using H2 database, so I'm going to configure H2 data source properties in my application. Then third step, create request binding class. Create request binding classes. Create request and response binding classes. Create the request and response binding classes. Now, our REST API is receiving some data from the user, right? Our REST API is receiving some data from the user. Why? Because our application will have both front end and back end. Our application will have both front end and back end. Okay. Now this is my REST API which I am going to develop in the back end. For this REST API, we will have a front end also. That is a different application. The front end application we are going to develop by using Angular. Front end we are going to build by using Angular. This REST API is communicating with the database. This is a H2 database where our data will be available. This is my H2 DB. Insurance plans data is available in my H2 DB. My REST API is communicating with this H2 database. Angular application is going to communicate with the REST API. So REST API will receive some input and REST API should provide some output. So in which format we are getting the input for the REST API? In which format we are getting the data from the user, that is the input data. In which format we are getting the output data, that we need to decide by using input binding classes and output binding classes. That is called request binding classes and response binding classes. Once this request and response binding classes are created, next step, we need to create entity class and repository interface. Create entity class and repository interface. In the database table we have the data, right? In order to retrieve the data from the database table, we need to create an entity class and we need to write the repository interface. Next step, create service interface with implementation. Create service interface with implementation classes. Then finally, create REST controller. Create a REST controller with required methods. Create a Swagger config class for the documentation. Next one, insert data into DB table. Insert static data into DB table for testing our application. Insert static data into DB table to test our application. Here I'm going to use one file called data.sql. Then next one, run the application and test it using Swagger UI. Run the application and test it using Swagger UI. Deploy the application in cloud. Then next one, develop front-end application for this. Using Angular. Okay, good. So these are the steps that we need to complete for the third mini project. Clear? Requirement, I hope I explained multiple times in the previous session, and I gave 2 days of time for you people to develop. I don't know how many of you developed. I'm going to develop this in the class. As I told that I will give live coding, so this complete project also I'm going to develop. If you already developed, then good. If you don't develop, then that's not my problem. Create the Spring Starter application with below dependencies. These are the dependencies I am adding. Why I am adding these dependencies also I am explaining now. Web Starter to develop REST API, JPA Starter for DB communication, H2 for the H2 dependency, POI API for Excel report generation, OpenPDF for PDF generation, Project Lombok for setters getters, Swagger for documentation purpose. Then in our application we need to configure with which database we are going to connect. The data source properties we have to configure, and we need to configure server port number also. If you are using already Oracle, then you need to change it, because default server is going to take 8080 port number. In my laptop I don't have that Oracle, so I no need to change the port. I will go with the default port. Then we need to create request and response binding classes, because in which format the request is coming to the REST API, in which format the REST API is sending the response to the user, to the UI, how the data coming from the UI, how the data going to the UI. Based on that you need to create the request and response binding classes. And we need to create the entity class and the repository interface also, because we are dealing with the database. So in the database we will have a table with the data. So based on that table structure, we need to create the entity class and we need to create the repository interface. For writing the business logic, we are going to write a service method. I will tell you what are the methods that we need to write in the service for the given requirement. Right? Then create the REST controller with the required methods, because the REST controller is used to handle the request and response which is coming from the UI. The REST controller is used to handle the request which is coming from the UI. Create the Swagger config class for the documentation purpose. We already added the Swagger for first mini project as well as for second mini project. Same thing we are going to add for the third mini project also. This step is required because we are doing the search operation for the data available in the table. I'm going to insert some dummy data into the table. I already told you that we need to insert 20 records into the table for multiple plans. How can we insert the data into H2? H2 database is a temporary database. Sir, I will insert the data, I will restart my project, I will lose my data. So that's why there is a technique. You can insert the data every time when the application is restarted. That is a data.sql. I will keep my data in the data.sql. So whenever your project restart, the queries available in the SQL file will be executed. Once it is done, create the REST controller, then it's done. Yeah. Run the application and test it using Swagger UI. Deploy the application in the cloud platform. Develop the front-end application using Angular. Chalo. These are the steps so that we can complete our back-end implementation. Let's go to the workspace. Create a project. Create a project by using Spring Boot, Spring Starter project. Yes, this project name I am giving 16th dynamic search application. Previous project, I will take those dependencies and I will add it here. For Swagger, for POI API, these things, 4 dependencies I am going to add extra from outside.
What I?
4 dependencies I am going to add extra from outside. First, let this project.
రోజు ఒకసారి అవుతుంది.
These are the 4 dependencies I am going to add extra. These are the 4 dependencies. POI XML, Open PDF, Swagger. These dependencies I am going to add. When I am creating the boot application, I cannot select these dependencies because in the STS IDE, we don't have the option to select the dependencies. So that is the reason I am taking these dependencies from MBN repository and I am going to add in our project pom.xml. Go to project pom.xml. I want to use Spring Boot 2.5.3. Let's try with that. If it is working, then no issue. If not, we will change the version. Now, I'm adding 4 dependencies extra, guys. What are those 4? POI XML, because I want to generate the Excel file from my application. Excel file generation will be done at the back end only, not at the front end. I'm adding the POI XML to generate the Excel. I'm adding the Open PDF to generate the PDF. Swagger Fox, Swagger UI. Swagger Fox is used to generate the documentation. Swagger UI to test our API with the user interface. To test our API with the user interface. Okay, it is downloading the dependencies. Meanwhile, create the request binding classes and response binding classes. Here, user can select 1 drop down or user can select 2 drop downs and click on the search button. So what is the input for the REST API? Plan name and plan status, only plan name or only plan status, or both also can come as an input for the REST API. So for that I am going to create one request binding class. Close unrelated projects. Here I am taking a new package or new class I will take. In this class I will take, it is a binding request class I am taking. The class I'm going to take it as set request. User can search for that. User will search that data by selecting the drop downs. So for that I'm taking private string plan name. Plan name will come as a input. Private string plan status. Now if you have the Lombok, then you can use @data. If you don't have the Lombok, then you can go for setters and getters. If you have the Lombok installed in your IDE, then you add the Lombok annotation. This class is used as a search request. The meaning is, when user select the drop down and click on the search button, data will go to the REST API in the form of search request object. User may select only plan name, user may select only plan status, user can select both also. When user select both, the data will come in the form of object. Or user select any one also, data will come in the form of object. One field will have the data, another field will have null value. This is my request object. Now similarly, user is searching for the data, right? User will get the response. How we are going to send the response? Response we are going to send. For this I am creating one package called response package. This one I am taking as a plan response. User is getting response from our REST API. What data that user is going to get? Private integer plan ID. In the database, plan information will be available. Private string plan name will be available. Private string holder name, who is holding that plan, and private string plan status. Plan ID, plan name, holder name, and plan status. That is what we have taken in the previous requirement, right? Users plans data will be available. Plan name, plan status will be available. Plan name, plan status, holder name, benefit amount. Benefit amount also will be available. Private string benefit amount. Users plans will have a benefit amount also. Benefit amount also. Plan ID, plan name, holder name, plan status, and benefit amount. This is the data that is going to the UI to display in the table. Search results. User will select the drop downs, will click on the search button. Then search request will go to the REST API. Then REST API will send the response based on the criteria. If you click search directly, all the records will come to the UI. If you select plan name and if you click search, based on the plan name, the response will come and display here. If you select only plan status and if you click search, based on the plan status, the response will come and will display here. If you select both, based on the both drop downs data, response will come here. To send the response, this is the plan response class I am taking. For this also I am writing setters and getters. I am writing set. My request binding class and response binding class is ready. My request binding class is ready and my response binding class is also ready. Next one, entity. We are going to take a table. We are going to take a table. So which class is mapped with the database table? Insurance plans table will be available in the database. We need one entity class to map with the database table. Table name is going to be insurance plans. In the table, what are the columns we are going to take? Let's write the variables for them and map our variables with the database. Table columns. Private, integer, we will have a plan and we will have a plan name. In the table, we will have holder name, private string holder name, and we will have private string plan status, private string plan status, and we are going to have private string benefit amount. Okay, fine. Here plan ID is represented with the primary key. Generated value not required because we are not going to insert any data. My application will perform just retrieval. So generated value annotation not required. This variable is mapped to primary key column variable. For that I am using @ID. @column name is equal to plan ID. @column name is equal to plan ID. Then I am taking plan name. Here plan name variable I am mapping with another column called plan name. Holder name I am mapping with another column called holder name. Holder name. Here I am writing another column plan status variable I am mapping with another column called plan status. Benefit amount also I am mapping with the column. This column will be benefit amount. Benefit amount. Can you look at this? My entity class. For these variables I am writing setters and getters. Again I am telling you, if Lombok is available, you can use @data. Fine. With this my entity class is also ready. The class which is mapped with the database table, the Java class which is mapped with the database table is called as entity class. Right. Now let's go for interface. Repository. Repository. To perform the DB operations, I'm taking insurance plan repository. How to represent our class as a repository, our interface as a repository? It is going to extend from JPA repository so that we can directly use the methods directly. Now here I'm taking primary key type as a serializable. Serializable. This is my repository. For the repository interfaces, writing @repository annotation is optional because your repository is already extending the properties from JPA repository. So when the application starts, we are going to understand this. We are going to understand this. So with this, you see, project creation is done. Data source properties I have not configured. Let me go there and configure them as well. Application properties, spring dot data source dot username, spring dot data source dot password, spring dot data source dot URL, spring dot data source dot driver class. Okay, username you can take anything for H2, URL JDBC H2 mem testdb, driver class name org.h2.driver. So these are my data source properties. Server port I no need to configure because I'm good with 8080. Alright. Project created with the dependencies, properties configured, response and request classes also created, entity class and repository interface is also created. Next one, service. This is the most important part because the business logic will be available in the service. New interface, I'm going to create one package. In this package, I'm going to create our service interface. Inside the service interface, we need to write the methods also. Okay. Here, I'm taking a service with a name called insurance plan service. I'm taking the service with insurance plan service. Good. Click on finish. Here, we have to identify the methods based on the requirement. User can click on the search by using criteria. So here I'm taking public void search plans. For this I am passing search request object. If user performs search by selecting the drop downs, the data will come in the form of search request object. When the user is searching for the data, we need to send the plans data as a response. So there can be one plan for the search criteria, or there can be multiple plans for the search criteria. So that's why I'm taking the return type as a list of response. List of a plan response. Already I have created search request. This is going to take the input data which is coming from the user interface, and this is going to represent output data which is going as the output to the REST API. So I have created one method. Which is search plans. This method is taking search request as the input, and it is giving list of a plan response as the output. Observe. Here user can select the drop downs and click on the search button. So he may select first drop down, he may select the second drop down, or he may select both drop downs. He will click on search. So that is the reason I am taking search request. Then based on that search criteria, more than one record also can come from the DB. So that's why I am taking list of plan response. That is for first thing. Now second one, in the requirement I told you, this drop downs should contain unique plan names. This drop down should contain unique plan status. What is the meaning of that? In the table, whatever the data is available, you need to get the table data and you need to display the plan names here. In the table, what are the statuses available, you need to get those statuses and you need to display here. So we need to get the plan name and we need to get the plan status also from the database. How can we get the data from the database, plan name and plan status? Public list of string, get unique plan names. And I will write another method, public list of string, get unique plan status. Unique plan statuses. These two methods are used to fetch the data to display in the drop down. This method is used to retrieve the data based on the search criteria. So this method will get the unique plan names from the table, will display in the first drop down. This method is used to get the data from the second drop down. Get the data for first drop down, get the data for the second drop down. This method will retrieve the data based on the search criteria. Are you able to understand the methods which I have identified in the service layer? Are you able to understand the methods which I am writing in the service layer? Come on. Good. Now, let's try to implement this. Let's try to implement these methods by using service IMPL. Insurance plan service IMPL. Let's add this interface where I am going to implement, that is insurance plan service. Okay, click on finish. Then to represent this class as a service, I'm going to write @service annotation, so that this class will become a Spring Bean. This class will become a Spring Bean. First, let me write the logic for these two methods. It is easy now. Here, my service should call the repository. For that, I'm going to inject insurance plan repository repo. So I'm injecting the repository object into service by using auto wiring. So I have used @service annotation to represent this class as a Spring Bean. @service annotation I'm using to represent this class as a Spring Bean. And I'm using @auto wide annotation to inject the repository object into my service object. Here I have two methods, get unique plan names and get unique plan statuses. Do you have any method in the repository to get the unique plan names? No. We have find by ID. We have the methods to retrieve the data based on the primary key. We have the methods to retrieve all the records. We have the methods to retrieve all the records. We have the methods to retrieve records based on the primary key. But my requirement is different. I want to get unique plan names available in the table. So we need to write our custom method. Let me go for custom queries. Public list of string get plan names. Do I need to get all the plan names available in the table? I want to get the unique plan names available in the table. Query select distinct plan name from entity class. What is our entity class? Insurance plan. Now guys, see here, select a distinct plan name. This is a column name, that is a mapped column name, variable name which is mapped with the column name. Select a distinct plan name from the entity. So it is going to give me unique plan names available in the table. Similarly, I will go for public list of string of get plan statuses. For that we are going for query select distinct plan status from insurance plan. Got it? This method will get only unique plan names available in the table. I am writing a custom query by using @query annotation. This method will get the unique plan statuses available in the table. For that also I am writing custom query. Now go to service IMPL. Here you can simply call return repo dot get plan names. Here you can simply call the method return repo dot get plan statuses. Get plan names and get plan statuses is completed. Next one, I want to retrieve the data based on the search criteria. Here guys, as I told you, if user don't select the drop down, we need to retrieve all the records. But can you guarantee that user will click on search button every time without selecting the drop down? No. He may select, he may not select. We don't know. That depends upon user. Some users will select only first drop down. Some users will select the second drop down. Some users will not select any drop down. Some users will select both drop downs. As I have already shown you in the flip card, we have a search functionality from person to person. The search criteria is going to change. From the person to person, the search criteria is going to change. Electronics, mobile, Apple mobile, or something like this. Mobiles are available here now. Click on mobiles. When you click on the mobiles, 10,877 products are coming. Some people may select the brand name. After selecting the brand name, they may select the rating. After selecting the rating, they may select the RAM. Yes, right? Multiple conditions. Remove the rating, remove the RAM, and remove the brand name. So it depends upon user. Similarly, in our scenario also, one user may select one drop down, another user may select the second drop down, another user may select both drop downs. Some users may not select any drop down. Based on that user operation, we need to retrieve the data. Here, can I go for a dynamic query, or I need to go for a static query? Do I need to go for a static query, or do I need to go for a dynamic query? I need to go for a dynamic query. Most of you people, I'm thinking that I don't know. Maybe you may have written find by plan name and plan status. That will not work out. Here we need to create the query dynamically. Now, first for that, I'm creating insurance plan. Entity class I'm creating. Entity object I'm creating. Entity is equal to new class. This is my entity object. Now I am going to check whether user entered, when user selected the plan name or not. Plan name may come, may not come. Search request may come, may not come. So I'm going to check several conditions. if null not equal to search request, that means user has selected something. If user don't select anything, search request object will be null, no data. If request not equal to null, if search request not equal to null, that means user has selected some drop down. Which drop down he has selected? If search request, let me take it a small variable. So if null not equal to request and request dot get plan name, request dot get plan name not equal to null, that means plan name not equal to null, and request dot get plan name dot not equals to empty. That means what? User has selected the plan name. If this condition satisfy, my understanding is user selected the plan name. I'm checking. Request is not null, plan name is not null, plan name is not empty. Search request means whatever user select here, that data will come into this object. If this object is not equal to null, if the plan name is not null, if the plan name is not empty, that means user selected the plan name. I need to filter the data based on the plan name. How I will do? Entity dot set plan name, that is request dot get plan name. If the plan name is selected by the user, this condition will satisfy. If this condition is satisfied, I am adding the plan name to my entity object. I am adding the plan name to my entity object. Similarly, some users may select a second drop down. So how I am going to check it? If null not equal to request and request dot get plan status not equal to null, and if request dot get plan status not equals to empty, not equals to empty. What is the meaning of that? User has selected the second one. If user selected the second one, then I am going to set entity dot set plan status is equal to request dot get plan status. Perfect. With this, we are able to identify which drop down user is selected. If user selected first drop down, plan name will be added to entity. If user selected second drop down, plan status will be added to entity. If user selected only second one will be added. If user selected only first one will be added. If user selected both will be added to entity. If user selected both drop downs, both the conditions will satisfy, both will be added to entity. That's good. Next here, I need to retrieve the data based on the entity. Here, I am going to create one example object to prepare the query dynamically. My query should be prepared dynamically. I don't want to retrieve all the records every time. My query should be prepared dynamically based on the data available in the entity class. I'm going to pass example of entity, which is going to give me example object. Now, for this example object, I am passing to repository.findAll. I am passing this example. The beauty of this example is here generally findAll method means it is going to retrieve all the records. But I'm not. If I call like this, then that's true. All the records available in the table, it is going to retrieve. All the records available in the table, it is going to retrieve. Are you getting my point? It is going to retrieve all the records which are available in the table. But do we need to retrieve all the records? No. Based on the conditions, we need to retrieve. So for that, I am creating the conditions. If first condition satisfied, plan name is selected, adding to the entity. If second condition satisfied, plan status is selected, adding to the entity. That entity I am passing, I am creating an example with the entity. Why? Whenever you use an example object with the entity, whatever the data available in the entity, based on that query will be prepared dynamically. If you set the plan name for the entity, then it will write a query, select star from table where plan name is equal to given value. If you set the plan status for the entity, it will prepare a query, select star from the table where plan status is equal to given value. If you set both the plan name and plan status, then it will prepare a query, select star from table where plan name is equal to given value and plan status is equal to given value. If you don't set these two conditions, then your entity will be empty. Then it is going to retrieve all the records. So our requirement will be satisfied here with this example object. Now when I call find all method with the example, I'm getting list of insurance plans. Insurance plan is the entity class, but my method should return the plan response. So how can we convert the entity data to the response binding object? That's plan response, list of plan response, plans is equal to new array list, is equal to new array list. Then iterate the entities by using for each loop. Insurance plan, that is one entity. I'm going to get the plans. Entity already I have taken, so I will take it as a IP plans data. Okay, this is find all. Then what I will do, for every entity I will create one plan response object. Plan response, plan is equal to new plan response. I will go for bean utils.copy properties, entity object, and the source is the plan. I'm copying the data from the entity to the response binding. Then I'm going to add plans data dot add of plan. Every plan I'm adding to plans data. Then I'm going to return plans data from my method. That's it. This method is going to filter the data dynamically based on the given criteria. This method is going to filter the data dynamically based on the given criteria. Tomorrow if you add one more drop down, then there will be one more condition here. Whether to filter the data based on that condition or not, we are going to add it. Currently I have two conditions to filter. That's why I'm writing two conditions to check. If this condition satisfied, that means user want to filter the data based on the plan name. If this condition satisfied, that means user want to filter the data based on the plan status. If both the conditions are satisfied, user want to filter the data based on the both options. If these two conditions are not satisfied, that means user want to retrieve all the records. Okay? Once I have executed this find all with the is to list of response binding classes. I'm converting the list of entities to list of binding classes.
Welcome to Geo. Recording in progress. మీ రోజువారీ డేటా బ్యాలెన్స్ 1.98 GB లో నుండి 2.
Shall I move on? I want to create a REST controller now. Our service logic is completed. Shall I create a REST controller now? Shall I create a REST controller now? Yeah. Let us create a REST controller. New class, REST controller. I'm creating a class with a name called insurance REST controller. insurance REST controller. To represent this class as a REST controller, I am using one annotation called @REST controller. Inside the REST controller, I am injecting my service, private insurance plan service. How I am injecting the service in the REST controller? By using auto wiring. Guys, first I am writing the methods. First I am writing the methods for these things. For the drop down, I am writing the methods for drop downs. 2 drop downs, 2 methods required. Search button, 1 method is required. For Excel, 1 method is required. For PDF, 1 method is required. So total, how many methods should be there in the REST API? Total, how many methods should be there in the REST API? 5 methods should be there in the REST API. 1 method should give the data for the plan name dropdown. 1 method should give the data for plan status dropdown. 1 method should handle search request. 1 method to handle Excel icon. 1 method to handle PDF icon. Chalo. First, let me write the methods to get the plan names. Public response entity of list of string. Get plan names. User will not pass any data for this method, just we need to send the response. Okay. Service dot get unique plan names, which is giving me list of plan names. Return new response entity of whatever the plan names we are getting, we need to send that in the response body. Plan names http status dot OK. Plan names http status dot OK. This method I am binding to get request by using get mapping /plan names. So whenever a get request comes to this URL, it will retrieve the unique plan names available in the table. It will return to the UI as a response. So similarly, public response entity of list of string of get plan statuses. Same thing here also. Service dot get unique plan statuses, which will give list of statuses. Plan statuses. How can we return this data? Return new response entity of statuses.